International Video Network welcomes you to Alaska. Alaska, a land so vast it defies the imagination. A wildness so profound it draws you back to your place in nature. People that warm the heart, and a heritage that spans the breadth of human history. Alaska's every dimension stretches the imagination, from its 30,000 miles of convoluted coastline to its countless unnamed peaks. Covering an area 1/5 the size of the continental United States, Alaska's rich geological heritage includes 17 of the 20 highest mountains in the United States, half the world's glaciers, 3 million lakes, and 3,000 meandering rivers. Alaska is a land of surprises. To many people, Alaska means snow, ice, and cold. But to those that know her, Alaska also means long summer days that produce some of the world's largest vegetables. It is a land not of igloos, but of Russian churches and European villages. It is a land not only of log cabins, but of high-tech skyscrapers and state-of-the-art communications. Visitors expecting to observe nature in Alaska may find out how much a part of nature they are when they observe a grizzly bear picking up their scent in the wild. The unexpected seems to be the norm in Alaska. It's not uncommon to find people fishing at midnight, or to see a sunset at noon. In some places, the summer sun never hits the horizon. And in winter, the northern lights can turn the sky into a dazzling display of dancing illuminations. In observing the geology of Alaska, we become witness to the very forces that shape the earth on which we live. The perceptible movement of a massive glacier, active volcanoes forming new rock, and the grinding of ice forming new soil. These signs of massive change frozen into the landscape makes one wonder if the years by which we measure time aren't just fleeting moments in the true scheme of things. Yet this ancient land, seemingly still and frozen, breathes with life. Far from being a barren wasteland, Alaska supports the most varied and abundant wildlife in North America. The drama of the salmon run, the sight of millions of reddening fish returning to their ancestral spawning grounds to breed and die, illustrates the fleeting nature of life. Yet the awesome power of the rainbow trout, thriving on the eggs the salmon leave, bears witness to life's tenacity. It's impossible to view Alaska's wildness without gaining a new perspective on life itself. The majesty of Alaska's diverse wildlife is matched by the equally fascinating diversity of its people. Modern Alaskans have one thing in common. Every one of them is here by choice. The more recent arrivals have come here to partake of Alaska's many economic opportunities, or to enjoy the freedom and contact with nature the Alaskan lifestyle affords. In addition to the modern Alaskan, the Eskimo, the Indian, and the Aleut have maintained their cultural identity in small communities scattered throughout the 50th state. The indigenous natives, the Indians and Eskimos, whose aboriginal homeland this is, have fared better than their cousins to the south and are committed to preserving the values of their native cultures. The very size of Alaska encourages diversity in its people. Many communities remain isolated by distance and terrain. And it's this same isolation, the empty spaces on the Alaskan maps, that visitors to Alaska find irresistible. The major highways cover only a small portion of the state, and of these, only a few are open year-round. Many towns are accessible only by plane, or in the case of some northern coastal towns, by barge during the summer months. The airplane plays a major role in all aspects of modern Alaskan life. Owning a small plane is not a luxury reserved for the wealthy, but a commonplace necessity. One of 3 Alaskan citizens has a pilot's license, giving the state more private pilots per capita than anywhere in the world. And instead of a main street, many communities have an airstrip down the center of town. It would be difficult to see very much of Alaska without spending some time in a small plane. Charter air services are readily available throughout the state. Fly-in fishing trips are popular and provide the wilderness experience of a lifetime for the adventurous angler. Those who prefer to explore the more beaten path find that the Alaskan Railroad offers an equally exciting way to venture into the Alaskan wilderness. The train connects Anchorage with Fairbanks by way of Denali or Mount McKinley National Park, and is one of the most popular ways to see the park. The station is just a few yards from the Denali Park Hotel, which is itself built around old railroad cars. Since passenger cars are no longer allowed into the park, the train provides a viable alternative for travel to and from Denali. From the hotel, free shuttle buses commute in and out of the park on a regular basis. South of Anchorage, the Alaskan Railroad serves the stretch along Turnagain Arm to Portage and the fishing village of Seward. But trains and planes are not the only form of transportation used by Alaskans. Dog sleds, once the most comfortable and fastest way to get around in Alaska, have been replaced by the three-wheelers and snowmobile. But the dog remains an integral part of Indian and Eskimo culture. In nearly every native village, there are racks of salmon drying in the sun, the traditional form of dog food for the dog sled teams. Dog sled racing is Alaska's official state sport, with major races taking place throughout the winter and spring seasons. The world's longest dog sled race, the Iditarod, follows the same grueling 1,000-mile trail that once provided the only overland access across the interior to Nome. Today, this great land can be traversed by glass-domed railroad cars, luxury cruise ships, and the ever-popular ferries plying the marine highway. Of all the waterways in the world, perhaps none can rival the unique beauty of Alaska's famed Inside Passage. Stretching some 600 miles from Ketchikan to Skagway and encompassing 13,000 miles of coastline, this maze of waterways, islands, and fjords is one of Alaska's most spectacular sights. Here on the Inside Passage, our everyday world dissolves, and we enter a seaborne planet on which forested islands seem to float, a world where the watery fingers of fjords stretch out to distant glaciers. It's a world where a passing bird may be a seagull, or it may be a bald eagle, where whales and porpoises break the calm of a horizon of merging sea and air. The summer sunset in Alaska seems to last forever, and there's no better place to enjoy it than from the deck of a boat on the Inside Passage. The colors shift and change until all the world turns to gold. The town of Ketchikan is the first in a string of Alaskan communities accessible only by sea or air. Although Ketchikan almost never sees snow or ice, it is one of the rainiest places in North America, averaging some 154 inches of rain per year. Despite the rain, Ketchikan is a popular vacation spot, due in part to its outstanding sport fishing and its close proximity to the lower 48. Years before the present town was here, this was a fishing camp for Haida and Tlingit Indians, who left a visible legacy of their proud culture. These mysterious, awe-inspiring totem poles, combining both human and animal forms, are genealogies, stories of family deeds. A symbolic record of a non-literate people, they demonstrate the Indian belief that man is involved in a deep kinship with nature. The totemic animals, the raven, the bear, the shark, the wolf, and the eagle, are not just animals, but true relatives on this earth.
A lot of times there's a pride that is involved in being native and being an Indian, and that has kind of been lost. Carving is kind of considered a lost art, but the whole idea is to try to revive it. I think it's very important to try to develop or pass on or even inspire some of those individuals that are that have a little interest in carving.
As the Marine Highway winds its way north, it stops at many small towns along the way. For towns like Wrangell, the ferry is the main link with the outside world. Locals use it for visits to other towns along the route, and of course tourists and adventure seekers use the ferry to get to jumping off points such as this. After the Wrangell narrows, the bright and beautiful town of Petersburg beams a velkommen, which means welcome in Norwegian, and the people of this town mean it. The clear, cold water and stately fjords on this extreme tip of Midtdorf Island reminded Peter Bushman so much of his native Norway that he settled here. Other Scandinavians joined him and built Petersburg, an Alaskan town with a distinctly European flavor. As in other towns of the Inside Passage, the people of Petersburg make their living from the forest and the sea. The traditional Norwegian art of rosemaling decorates buildings as it does in Norway. Even the painted shutters here recall that other much-loved place on waters far away. On days like this, when the clouds part and the snow-bright mountains appear, Petersburg is a place that's hard to leave. But the Marine Highway goes on, and another beautiful city with a different history awaits. Sitka rests at the foot of spruce-covered mountains and overlooks the blue waters of the Sound, where a chain of small wooded islands repeats the endlessly lovely theme of forest meeting sea. Sitka began as a Tlingit Indian village until the Russian Alexander Baranov, the commander of a fur hunting party, built a fort here in 1799. The Tlingit Indians rebelled and in a surprise attack destroyed the fort. Baranov retreated to return with warships and decisively defeated the Indians. Baranoff then built a castle on this hill, but only the cannon remains today. Sitka soon became a flourishing town. It was here that the Russian flag was lowered in 1867 when the United States bought all of Alaska from Russia for the then outrageous price of $7.2 million, less than 3 cents an acre. Sitka became the capital of the new territory until the early 1900s when it was moved to Juneau. Timber, fishing, and government keep Sitka thriving, and tourism is growing. St. Michael's Church is one of the finest examples of rural Russian architecture in Alaska. When this 150-year-old building burned down in 1966, the people saved the doors and priceless icons and rebuilt the church exactly. This stately building is the first of 5 homes the state of Alaska has built for its older citizens. The Old Pioneers' Home honors the original settlers of Alaska, and the statue of the Old Pioneer was modeled after Skagway Bill Fonda. The Sheldon Jackson Museum houses an excellent collection of antique and modern Indian artifacts and totem poles. In its own way, this native art is a forceful and graphic history of the events that shaped the region. Nearby, Sheldon Jackson College operates a salmon hatchery, which visitors can observe from viewing platforms. Beyond the hatchery, the yacht harbor lies nestled in a beautiful natural harbor, one of the reasons why Sitka became the first capital of Alaska. In the early 1900s, the swell of gold rush activity moved Alaska's political and economic focus north to the town of Juneau. Juneau is a busy, modern city thrust against a 15,000 square mile ice-capped range of mountains with water on the other side. In Alaska, nature dwarfs human achievement, and yet up against these elemental forces, the people persist and even thrive. Not only do they thrive, they have fun. Juneau still has the rollicking energy of those 2 miners, Joe Juneau and Richard Harris, who discovered gold here in the 1880s. In the 1940s, the mines closed and government replaced mining as the chief occupation. But Juneau never lost that frontier sense of optimism and excitement. There are, of course, all the modern buildings that one would expect in a state capital, but the real flavor of Juneau is that of the Old West. It's not hard to imagine what those days and nights were like during the peak of the gold boom. And still today, the Alaska Hotel, with its antique furnishings, shows what a visitor to this town could expect in the way of accommodations back in the days when gold was king and Victoria was queen. But unlike old western towns of the lower 48, Juneau has a glacier within walking distance. The famous Mendenhall Glacier is receding, and as it does, the land-hungry people of Juneau follow it with buildings. Because of its geographic limitations, the city of Juneau has trouble finding the space it needs. Ironically, it's actually the 2nd largest city in the world in terms of geographical size, but one of the smallest in terms of usable space. It's the capital of the state of Alaska, but a capital without room to grow. In 1974, the people of Alaska voted to move the state capital to Anchorage, but they never voted in the funds for the move. Today, Juneau remains the political capital, but because of its location and its room for growth, Anchorage has become the financial capital of Alaska. To any big city dweller, Anchorage seems like a small town. Yet fully half the population of this immense state resides here. This gives you some idea how sparsely populated the rest of the state is. Despite its small size by lower 48 standards, Anchorage has its share of city hustle and bustle. The city of Anchorage dates back to the late 19th century, when it was a tent city for gold miners and fur trappers. Fur trapping is still a major industry in Alaska, and Anchorage is the central marketplace for some of the most exotic and high-quality furs in the world. The Fur Rendezvous celebration takes place in Anchorage each winter. It's been called the Mardi Gras of the North. It evolved from a gathering of fur trappers to a rip-roaring celebration which features such delightful events as outhouse and canoe races. In addition to furs, Anchorage offers unique opportunities to buy native art and craft items from throughout the state. To the Alaskan native, art was and is a way of life. Every object used in the routines of daily life was turned into an object of art. Scrimshaw, ceremonial masks, and ivory carvings are but a few of the art forms available in these shops. There's no shortage of things to do in Anchorage. For the more adventurous spirit, an evening balloon ride provides an unforgettable experience. The sky above Anchorage is dotted with these colorful forms drifting silently across the sky almost every evening during the summer months. Many prefer to stay closer to the ground and see Anchorage from the second story of one of the free double-decker buses serving the city. One of the more popular day trips from Anchorage follows the Seward Highway along Turnagain Arm past the Potter Point State Game Refuge on the way to Portage Glacier. Potter Flats, a mere 10 miles from Anchorage, is a wonderful place to view wildfowl. Over 130 species of migratory birds feed and nest here. The road to Portage Glacier also passes several areas where salmon spawn in creeks adjacent to the road. Just inside the park, a viewing platform extends out onto the water for a bird's eye view of this natural spectacle. Portage Glacier itself is one of the most photographed spots in Alaska. This clear blue lake with its thousands of floating icebergs becomes a playground for hundreds of visitors every day. Some 70 miles south of Portage Glacier, the highway and the Alaskan Railroad end at the foot of the Chugach Mountains and the port town of Seward. Seward has been an important connection to the outside world since it was founded in 1903. These pilings are all that remain of the original cannery and port facility after the 1964 earthquake. But the port was rebuilt and stands today as one of the best-equipped fishing ports in the western United States. In addition to its extensive commercial fishery, Seward is one of Alaska's favorite spots for ocean sport fishing. The salmon in Resurrection Bay are sometimes so thick they seem to push each other out of the water. But there's more to do than fish in Seward. The Kenai Fjords National Park offers some of the most beautiful scenery and abundant wildlife in all of Alaska. Several private charters take visitors on day-long trips from Seward into this relatively new national park. And the experience is unforgettable. These enchanting fjords, stretching from Seward to the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, are the flooded valleys left by the ancient glaciers and provide the ideal habitat for thousands of migratory birds and a multitude of rare and beautiful animals. As the boat rounds the point of each new bay or fjord, a unique and stunning panorama unfolds. Majestic bald eagles nest on the isolated islets left by the weathering of surf and wind. Dramatic rock arches jut out of the azure waters, framing the distant glaciers and echoing the sounds of the surging swells. The playful dolphins can often be seen riding the waves created by the wake of the boat. For the seals and sea lions, these calm waters provide an ideal calving ground. The only danger they face is an occasional lunge onto the rocks by an aggressive killer whale, a natural enemy to these smaller sea mammals. And then there are the birds, thousands of them. Over 175,000 birds of some 18 species, including the famous puffin, make their nests here every year. Sea otters are perhaps the most lovable of all the seagoing mammals. These living treasures of the Northwest were almost hunted to extinction for their luxurious pelts. Protective legislation has now increased their chances for survival, at least here in Kenai Fjords National Park. At the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula is Homer, a commercial fishing port that has become popular with sports fishermen and campers alike. Perhaps best known for its great halibut fishing, Homer also boasts wonderful salmon, trout, crab, and shrimp fishing. Much of the town is located on a 4.5-mile spit of land that juts out into Kashimak Bay. On one side of the spit lies the harbor, home of a large commercial fishing fleet and some 80 sports fishing charter boats and hundreds of small private craft. Homer is one of the favorite places to fish for Alaska's famous giant halibut. Fish over 100 pounds are common, and very few fishermen are disappointed in these halibut-rich waters. The beach across from the harbor provides a clear view of St. Augustine, an active volcano that last erupted in 1986, spewing ash over much of this area. Nearby, the Valley of 10,000 Smokes on the Alaskan Peninsula provides a close look at an area of active volcanic activity. Beginning 100 miles southwest of Homer, this area is the site of a massive volcanic eruption which occurred in 1912. The explosions that created this moonscape were so immense that they were heard 750 miles away in Juneau. This area is also one of the most popular sports fishing regions in Alaska, if not the world. The Alaskan Peninsula is almost entirely devoid of roads, and the bears make the trails. Here, as in many parts of Alaska, the small plane is the main means of transportation, and the many fishing lodges scattered throughout the region rely heavily on small float planes to get their guests to the spectacular fishing grounds the Alaskan Peninsula is famous for. Nearly a dozen species of freshwater game fish inhabit this unique area, which has produced more world records than any other part of Alaska. The Bristol Bay Basin is home to the largest sockeye or red salmon runs in the world. Each summer, millions of mature salmon averaging 8 pounds migrate back to Bristol Bay tributaries to spawn. Following the call of some ancient instinct, the mature fish swim up their native rivers from the ocean, across the lakes, and into the smallest creeks to the place of their birth. Upon reaching their breeding grounds, the salmon mate, spawn, and then die, leaving their flesh to fertilize this delicate ecosystem. The trillions of eggs spawned on each streambed become a prime food source for predatory fish such as this fat rainbow. Iliamna Lake, the second largest lake in the United States, is the nursery for what are thought to be the largest rainbow trout in the world. Pound for pound, these rainbows put up a better fight than any other game fish. On the coastal rivers, fresh silver salmon provide unforgettable fishing for even the most jaded angler. These fish, just entering the streams, are full of the strength they will need for their long journey. All of the Pacific salmon enter freshwater as bright silver-sided fish, but eventually change color and shape as they move upstream to their spawning beds. Other animals make their homes in these waterways. Beavers often change the course of the rivers, and another creature makes his presence known by a network of trails and indentations in the grass. The coastal brown bears are the largest land-living carnivores in the world today. The Alaskan brown can weigh up to 1,300 pounds and can grow to 8 or 9 feet in length. Although they are cousins of the grizzly, the coastal bears are much better tempered and present little or no danger to prudent visitors. During the fishing season, these magnificent creatures are completely preoccupied with eating and scarcely seem to notice their human visitors as they devour fish after fish, storing up to 1/3 of their body weight in rich protein for the coming winter. One of the most popular places to watch the activity of bears in Alaska is here at the Brooks River. This short river is the site of several extensive salmon runs and the predictable return of large numbers of bears each summer. Several hundred miles northeast of the Alaskan Peninsula, Mount McKinley makes a spectacular centerpiece for one of the world's most awe-inspiring national parks. Nowadays, more often called by its original Athabascan name, Denali, meaning the high one, this largest mountain in North America is the proud pinnacle of the 600-mile Alaskan range. Due to its immense size, Denali affects the local atmospheric airflow patterns and actually creates its own weather systems. As a consequence, the mountain is often shrouded in clouds and hidden from view within the park, while it can be clearly seen from hundreds of miles away. The 90-mile road leading into the heart of the Denali Wilderness area offers easy access to what is truly one of the most dramatic wilderness experiences left anywhere in the world. This delicate ecosystem has been protected from the fate of so many of our national parks by a policy limiting traffic into the park to shuttle and tour buses. This restriction actually enhances the Denali experience. In this more peaceful environment with uncluttered roads, the animals come much closer to the road than they did before the restrictions were imposed. And there are other ways to see the park. Several companies offer flight-seeing excursions into the park, and raft trips are available on the nearby Nenana River. The river trip features Class 1 and 2 rapids most of the year, so there's not much chance of getting wet. A safe adventure that is fun and suitable for the whole family. There's more than wilderness to the Alaskan experience. The Matanuska Valley, located just 45 miles northeast of Anchorage, reveals another side of Alaska's rich natural heritage. Alaska's long summer days and deep volcanic soils combine to create the richest farmlands in the world for some crops. The area actually holds several world records for gigantic vegetables such as these giant 80-pound cabbages grown by Jane Dinko.
In the lower 48, you've got to understand that we have the long daylight and cool summers. And your crucifers, which is your cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, thrive under cool climate and long daylight.
They'll put on a pound or so a day right now. And that's a 4-foot yardstick. That isn't a 3-foot yardstick.
As the road from Anchorage to Fairbanks winds through the heartland of Alaska, many reminders of her fascinating history and unique lifestyles appear along the way. Throughout the state, many fine examples of Alaska's indigenous form of architecture can be seen. Even today, the classic log cabin has proven to be the most practical type of building and is used for everything from dog houses to churches. Fitting perfectly into the Alaskan landscape and built from readily available materials, these sturdy buildings are able to withstand huge snow loads and the stresses of thermal expansion. Natural burls, which grow on trees like this one, are often seen incorporated into these rustic structures. Alaska's northernmost major commercial center is the town of Fairbanks. Once a booming gold rush town, modern Fairbanks still sits on Alaska's frontier. It's the home of the University of Alaska and a jumping-off point for activities in the roadless north. The university is a research center for Alaska's agricultural and technological development and the site of one of the state's most prestigious museums. The Fairbanks Museum houses elaborate displays on native Indian and Eskimo culture, wildlife, and technology. These exquisite examples of ornate apparel were fashioned from the many natural materials available to the native Alaskan. The beauty and craftsmanship of the artifacts on display here reflect a world view that is as worthy of preserving as the endangered species that once shared this great land with its first human inhabitants. A few miles north of Fairbanks, the highway intersects the Great Alaskan Oil Pipeline, one of the most impressive technological feats of modern times. Although the pipeline looks a little incongruous winding its way through the wilderness landscape, it was designed at a time when America was just awakening to the need for ecological preservation. And it has many ecological safety features built into its design. Portions of the pipeline are elevated to allow the unimpeded migration of the caribou. And the pipeline is designed to slide on Teflon sleds as changes in temperature cause it to expand and contract. Expansion bumpers provide cushioning for these changes and are a part of the engineering features that assure structural integrity during an earthquake of up to 8.5 on the Richter scale. In order to keep the warm oil in the pipeline from melting the permafrost below, the posts suspending the tube are actually fitted with refrigeration coils. The high-tech design of the pipeline is quite a contrast to the old machinery displayed here in Alaska Land's mining valley. This large theme park, built by the state of Alaska and open to the public free of charge, also features a reconstruction of downtown Fairbanks during the gold rush days. These log houses were actually moved here from the old town center. A ride on the miniature model steam train is popular with the kids and a good way to explore the park. For a longer trip into Alaska's past, visitors board the Steamboat Discovery, the last stern wheeler on the Chena and Tanana rivers. The leisurely 4-hour excursion is run by the Binkley family, who have been piloting these riverboats for 3 generations. A few miles north of Fairbanks on 9 Mile Steese Highway, another fascinating piece of Alaskan history awaits. The famous No. 8 gold dredge. this 5-story, 250-foot rock-eating monster took its last bite of this rich placer deposit in the late 50s. Today, amateur prospectors try their hand at panning the gravels that lay just out of reach of the giant machine when it stopped working. Gold fever still kindles the Alaskan imagination, and nowhere is it more contagious than in Nome. There's still millions of dollars worth of gold trapped in this frozen ground, and there are still quite a few people making a living mining here. In fact, the Alaska Mining Company recently offered to move the entire city of Nome to a nearby location, which it had already worked, just so it could retrieve some of the ore trapped beneath these historic streets. Before 1898, the year the 3 lucky Swedes discovered gold here, there really was no city of Nome. The following year, gold was discovered in the sands of this beach. And within 2 years, Nome's population swelled to make it the biggest city in Alaska. The miners who built this town were so numerous on the beaches here that they measured their claims by how far they could reach with a shovel. A walk down Front Street in Nome is like a trip back through time to the Old West. Old-time saloons still line the streets, and fur trappers still work the surrounding hills, using Nome as their base. Several Eskimo villages use Nome as their connection to the outside world, but the real world of the Eskimo begins a little further north. Kotzebue is a town of a little over 2,000 people, 80% of them Eskimo, and still basically a subsistence culture. This is a harsh, wild place at the end of the earth, pressed against the cold Arctic Sea. Hunting and fishing are primary sources of livelihood. Well, Kotzebue sits on a peninsula near the location of the ancient Bering Land Bridge, which was the route of those earliest Americans on their trek from Asia to this new land. There is archaeological evidence here of settlements going back for millennia. It's this historical perspective that gives the native people of this region the strength to resist the pressures of an imported culture and to preserve their own ways.
We've lived in this area for thousands of years. This is an ancient living area for the Inupiaq people, and we've lived in harmony with nature. We've lived pretty much in harmony with ourselves, and we believe that the values that we currently have are going to allow us to continue to live here in harmony with nature and one another.
The native people here have a true resource in their own proven traditions. Modern cultural innovations are accepted when they serve a purpose, but there is an increasing awareness that for a hunting and gathering people, the old proven ways work best. Here in this living museum of the Arctic, the elders of the village preserve knowledge of this endangered culture to share with visitors who get an unusual opportunity to observe the native culture. In the museum, the elders have created a vital ongoing school to pass their wisdom about their own world to the youth of the culture. Ever since Admiral Perry, the people of the lower 48 have been learning that the Eskimo approach is uniquely suited to a unique environment. These handmade parkas trap body heat and provide ventilation. And the blanket toss, which is now a lively game, served a real survival need in the predominantly flat land with no hills or trees for vantage points. Hunters were tossed up as many as 30 feet into the air, allowing them to survey the terrain and spot game in the distance. This Eskimo version of the latter served a purpose and worked. The imported technology doesn't always work as well as the time-tested ways in this environmentally sensitive land. Here we see a house which must be fitted with an active refrigeration system to keep it from melting the permafrost beneath it and sinking into the ground. Like the tundra around it, the culture of these hardy people is a fragile and sensitive thing. Tundra, once scarred, remains scarred forever. These people know that they're trying to reverse an historical trend by refusing to change the basic elements of their culture. But they feel that it's worth the effort. They know that they are survivors, but they don't just want to survive, they want to survive with dignity and joy. And as it is with the Eskimo, struggling to maintain their culture while integrating into the modern world, so it is with all of Alaska. Alaska is a rare and fragile window into the natural world. A world where every living thing lives in harmony with the powerful forces of nature. A world where the forces of nature prevail, and man must be in tune or perish. Visitors fortunate enough to experience this wonderful place would do well to experience it on its own terms, without imposing their own day-to-day values on this unique and precious experience. Although one can bring modern creature comforts along, everyone who visits this raw and wild land finds themselves roughing it just a bit. For some, that may mean sleepless frostbitten nights on an ice field at the foot of Mount McKinley. For others, it may mean a lukewarm shower, a dirt road, or an evening without television. Part of the magic of Alaska is that her most profound experiences may come when least expected. The beaten path may offer many wonders, but the moments that last forever may sneak up on you like the Chinook winds and linger like an Alaskan sunset.
Anchorage, Alaska, a metropolitan city of over 250,000, can lose some 25,000 citizens when they move to the wilderness lying just outside the bursting, brimming city's doorstep. Royal British Navy Captain James Cook landed here in 1774. In a copy of his journal he wrote, "It be a wild, primitive place of long valleys and towering mountain, lashed by storm and tide, which are of considerable speed and strength, providing hazard for unwary man or animal. This land is home to great beasts of the sea and shore, which has created some danger at times for the crew. An extreme large ice bear of exceeding ill temper lives upon the ice, which flows out of the valleys to the sea in this cold area of the world. Our ships are easily provisioned by the numerous native peoples, and we've traded for many skins and goods. Our contact with the inhabitants have been pleasant, for they are a friendly, open people in the land of hostile elements. Many things have changed since 1774. Thousands of men came and went in attempts to take from this land its gold, its ivory, and furs. But in 1906, other men came here too, not to take, but to give to future generations the natural splendor and ruggedness they held so dear in this giant land, this great land, this wild, scenic Alaska. For the next few moments, we're going to take you on a tour of Denali National Park and Preserve at an unusual time when few except the park rangers are privileged to see it. The scenes you'll see are those of late fall, winter, spring, and summer, a time when only the animals walk the beauty of this sylvan land. The immensity of Denali surrounds you, tundra and mountains by the mile, dominated by the ever-present Mount McKinley. Among icy streams and along wild rivers, the abundance and variety of grass, fireweed, and flowers, nature's clock to winter, and fruits, matches Denali National Park wildlife. Denali National Park and Preserve is served by both road and rail. And while there is no rail link with the lower 48, the Alaska Railroad is exciting and viable transportation within this largest of states. After a tour of 4 straight months of 24 hours a day performances, there's something in the air that's different, and the animals sense it. The visitors have left, and the park once again belongs to nature alone.